Katie Miller woke up to the sound of metal scraping against metal. Her head hurt badly, and when she tried to move, she realized her hands were bound behind her back. The room was dark except for a thin line of blue light coming from under a door. She blinked several times trying to remember what had happened. The memories came back slowly. She had been working on the research ship Horizon, studying alien plant life near the frontier colonies. Her team had just finished collecting samples from a moon with 3 suns when the attack happened. The HFY warship appeared without warning. Their weapons cut through the Horizon's shields like paper. Katie remembered running toward the escape pods, but then something hit her from behind and everything went black. Now she was here. Wherever here was. The door opened suddenly and harsh white light flooded the cell. Katie squeezed her eyes shut against the brightness. Heavy footsteps approached, and she felt rough hands grab her arms and pull her to her feet. Her legs were weak, but the guards did not care. They dragged her forward. Katie's eyes adjusted to the light as they moved through a corridor. The walls were made of dark metal and strange symbols were carved into them. She saw other cells lining the hallway, and in some of them she could see shapes moving in the darkness, prisoners like her. They reached a larger room where 3 other humans were being held. Katie's heart lifted when she saw them. Ryan Patterson, the medical officer from her ship, Lisa Chang, their engineer, and Ben Garcia, who had been in charge of security. All 3 looked beaten and tired, but alive. "Katie," Ryan said when he saw her. Relief filled his voice. "We thought you were dead." Before Katie could answer, one of the guards struck Ryan across the face. The guard was HFY, a reptilian species that stood nearly 7 feet tall. His scales were dark green and his yellow eyes showed no emotion. "Silence," the guard said in a hissing voice. The words came through a translator device on his collar. "You speak when told to speak." "Not before." Another HFY entered the room. This one was larger than the guards, with red markings on his scales that showed high rank. He walked around the 4 humans slowly, studying them like a merchant might study livestock. "Humans," he said finally. "I am Zarn. You are now my property. Your ship was destroyed. No one knows you are here. No one is coming to save you." Katie felt fear rise in her chest, but she forced herself to stay calm. She had studied many alien species during her career. She knew that the HFY respected strength and despised weakness. Showing fear would only make things worse. "What do you want with us?" Katie asked, keeping her voice steady. Zarn turned to look at her. His tongue flicked out, tasting the air. "Bold for prey," he said. "That is good. Bold prey is worth more. You will be tested in the arena. If you entertain the crowds, you may live long enough to be sold. If you do not..." He let the sentence hang in the air. The guards took the humans to separate cells in a lower level of whatever structure they were in. Katie's cell was small, barely large enough to lie down in. The walls were smooth metal and there was no window. The only light came from a small panel in the ceiling that glowed with a dim red color. She sat on the hard floor and tried to think. Arena combat. She had heard stories about such places, illegal stations on the edge of known space where criminals and traitors gathered, places where the normal rules did not apply. If they were on one of those stations, rescue would be nearly impossible. The Galactic Peacekeeping Force rarely ventured this far out. Hours passed, or maybe days. It was hard to tell in the cell. Guards brought food twice, a gray paste that tasted like metal but kept her alive. Katie tried to talk to them, to learn anything useful, but they ignored her questions. On what she guessed was the 3rd day, Katie heard sounds from below her cell. Strange sounds, roars and howls and screams that did not sound human or HFY. The sounds of animals or maybe creatures that were more than animals. She pressed her ear against the floor, trying to make sense of what she heard. In the cell next to hers, someone tapped on the wall. Katie tapped back, and a conversation began through the metal. The tapping followed a simple pattern that reminded her of old Earth Morse code. The being on the other side was not human, but they managed to communicate basic ideas. The other prisoner was called Mothfolk by humans. Their species looked like giant insects with beautiful wings, but they were fully intelligent. This one told Katie through the tapping that Zarn owned this place, a station called Cracks. He made his money from arena fights and from selling prisoners to buyers across the galaxy. The Mothfolk prisoner explained that Zarn had a favorite trick for new captives. He would bring them to the arena and release a predator to face them. Usually he used young predators, juveniles that were big enough to be scary but not big enough to kill too quickly. The fear on the prisoner's face when they saw the predator was what the crowd loved. It broke their spirit before any real fight happened. Katie asked what kind of predator threw the tapping. The answer made her blood run cold. Shadow maws. She knew of them from her studies. They came from a world in the Outer Rim, a planet where everything hunted and everything was hunted. Shadow maws were apex predators, feared across multiple star systems. Even their young were deadly. That night, Katie could not sleep. She lay on the cold floor of her cell and thought about her options. Fighting a shadow maw was suicide. Running was impossible in an arena. But maybe there was another way. She had spent her whole adult life studying alien creatures, learning their behaviors, understanding what drove them. Predators followed patterns. They had instincts. If she could understand those instincts, maybe she could survive. The next morning, guards came for her. They pulled her from the cell and dragged her through corridors filled with noise. She could hear crowds now. Hundreds of voices in dozens of languages all mixed together. The sound of gambling and excitement. The sound of people waiting for blood. They pushed her into a holding area just outside the arena. Through a gap in the wall, she could see sand and bright lights. She could see the crowd, aliens of every type she had ever studied and some she had never seen before. They filled the seats around the circular pit waiting. Ryan, Lisa, and Ben were already there, locked in cages along the wall. Their faces showed horror when they saw her. "Katie, no," Lisa called out, but a guard shocked her cage with an energy prod, and she fell silent. Zarn's voice boomed through speakers around the arena. "Beings of all species," he announced. "Today we test new prey. Humans. They claim to come from a death world, yet look how soft they are. How weak. Watch as we show you the truth." The gate in front of Katie began to open. Beyond it was the arena, the sand, and the waiting crowd. She took a deep breath and stepped forward. Her legs shook, but she kept walking. The crowd grew quiet as she emerged into the light. Katie stood in the center of the arena and looked up at the hundreds of alien faces staring down at her. She thought of her family back on Earth. Her mother, who had always told her that courage was not the absence of fear, but the choice to act despite it. Her father, who taught her that all living things deserved respect. Somewhere below the arena, a gate was opening. Somewhere in the darkness, a creature was being released. Katie closed her eyes for just a moment and gathered her strength. Then she opened them again and waited to meet whatever was coming. The arena was bigger than Katie had thought. The sand beneath her feet was pale yellow, almost white, and it reflected the harsh lights that hung from the ceiling high above. The walls rose up 30 feet on all sides, smooth metal that no one could climb. At the top, the crowd filled every seat, their voices creating a sound like ocean waves. Katie looked around slowly, trying to take in every detail. There were gates set into the walls at 4 points. 3 were closed, but one directly across from where she stood was beginning to open. The grinding sound of metal on metal echoed through the arena, and the crowd grew quiet with anticipation. From the opening gate, darkness poured out. Then something moved in that darkness, something with eyes that reflected the light. Katie's heart pounded in her chest, but she forced herself to stand still. Every instinct screamed at her to run, to fight, to do anything but stand there waiting. But she knew better. She had studied predators her entire career. Running triggered chase reflexes. Fighting triggered combat responses. She had to do something different. The creature emerged fully into the light, and Katie got her first clear look at it. The shadow maw cub was about the size of a large dog from Earth, but that was where any similarity to Earth animals ended. Its body was covered in scales that looked black as midnight, but when the light hit them at certain angles, she could see hints of deep blue and purple. Along its spine, there were markings that glowed faintly, pulsing with a soft blue light. The cub moved on 6 legs, 3 on each side of its body. Each leg ended in paws with retractable claws that clicked against the sand as it walked. Its head was angular, almost triangular, with 4 eyes arranged in a diamond pattern. 2 faced forward, giving it depth perception for hunting. 2 faced more to the sides, letting it watch for threats. Its mouth was closed, but Katie could see the edges of sharp teeth behind the scaled lips. The crowd began to murmur as the cub entered the arena. Some voices sounded excited. Others sounded curious. Katie heard Zarn's voice boom through the speakers again. "Behold the human's opponent, a young shadow maw taken from the death world of Krell 9. Even as a juvenile, this creature has killed 3 times. Will the human run? Will she beg? Place your bets now. The cub stopped about 20 feet from Katie and studied her with all four eyes. Its head tilted slightly to one side and its nostrils flared as it took in her scent. The glowing marks along its spine pulsed faster, the light flickering like a nervous heartbeat. Katie knew this was the moment. Everything she did in the next few seconds would determine whether she lived or died. She thought about all her years of training, all the creatures she had observed, all the lessons she had learned about animal behavior. Slowly, very slowly, she lowered herself to the ground. She did not kneel with her legs under her, which might let her spring up quickly. Instead, she sat cross-legged in the sand, making herself smaller, making herself less threatening. She kept her hands visible in her lap, palms up. She did not look directly at the cub's eyes. Direct eye contact was a challenge in most predator species. Instead, she looked at a point just to the left of the creature, keeping it in her peripheral vision. The crowd's murmuring grew louder, confused. This was not what they expected. Katie heard Zarn's angry voice shouting commands in his own language. The cub started to circle her, moving to the left. Its gait was smooth and careful, the movement of a natural hunter. But Katie noticed something else. There was a slight hesitation in its back left leg, the tiniest hint of a limp. As the cub moved around her, Katie could see more details. The scales along its sides were not as bright as they should be. She had seen images of healthy shadow moths in her studies, and their scales had a sheen to them like polished stone. This cub's scales were dull, almost dusty, and there along its hindquarters she could see scars, not the random scars of play or hunting accidents. These were parallel lines, the kind left by energy prods or whips. This creature had been hurt, badly, probably many times. The cub completed its circle and stopped in front of Katie again. It was closer now, only about 10 feet away. Its tongue flicked out, forked like a snake's tongue, tasting the air. Katie knew that shadow moths used their tongues to sense chemicals, to gather information about potential prey or threats. She kept breathing slowly and evenly. She thought calming thoughts, trying to keep her fear from releasing the wrong hormones into her sweat. Fear smell would make the cub more aggressive. She needed to project calm, even though her heart was racing. The cub took a step closer, then another. Its head lowered slightly, and the glowing marks on its spine changed their pattern. The pulses became slower, more rhythmic. Katie recognized that pattern from her research. It was not an aggressive display. It was something young shadow moths did when they were uncertain, when they were looking for reassurance. Behind her, Katie heard movement. The guards were doing something, responding to Zarn's commands. She heard a high-pitched whine and realized they were charging energy prods. They were going to shock the cub to force it to attack her. The cub heard it too. Its head snapped toward the sound and its body tensed. The glowing marks flared bright with sudden fear. Katie saw the muscles in its legs bunch up, preparing to run or fight. She knew that if the guards shocked the cub while it was already afraid, it might attack her in panic. She did the only thing she could think of. She hummed. It was a low, soft sound, the kind of sound her mother had used to calm her when she was scared as a child. Not words, just a gentle musical tone that carried no threat, only comfort. The cub's head turned back toward her. All four eyes focused on her face. Katie kept humming, kept her hands still in her lap, kept her body relaxed despite every nerve screaming at her to move. The high-pitched whine grew louder. The guards were almost ready. Katie saw the cub's body tense again, saw its claws extend from its paws, digging into the sand. It was terrified. It did not want to fight, but it was being forced to, just like she was. Katie slowly extended one hand, keeping it low, palm down. She did not reach toward the cub, did not make it feel cornered. She simply offered her hand, letting the cub choose whether to investigate or not. The whine reached its peak. The guards were ready to fire. The crowd was shouting now, some angry that the fight had not started, others fascinated by what they were seeing. The cub made its choice. Instead of attacking, it lunged forward and pressed its head against Katie's extended hand. The movement was so sudden that Katie almost pulled back, but she forced herself to stay still. The cub's scales were warm under her palm, warmer than she expected. They felt smooth, like river stones heated by the sun. The creature pushed harder against her hand, and then its whole body followed. It pressed against her side, trying to make itself smaller, trying to fit into the shelter of her body. Katie felt the rapid beating of its heart against her ribs, The glowing marks on its spine were pulsing frantically now, but the pattern had changed. It was no longer the pattern of fear or aggression. It was the pattern young shadow moths used when seeking comfort from their pack. Katie wrapped her other arm around the cub, feeling its body trembling. She realized with sudden clarity that this creature was not a vicious predator. It was a child. A hurt, scared, traumatized child that had been taken from its family and forced to fight for the entertainment of strangers. Tears filled Katie's eyes. Her throat tightened. She pulled the cub closer and kept humming her soft, wordless song. The energy prods fired. Katie felt the shock run through both her and the cub. The pain was sharp and burning, spreading through her muscles. The cub yelped a high-pitched sound of pure agony, but it did not attack. Instead, it burrowed harder against Katie, trying to hide from the pain. Katie wrapped both arms around the creature, curling her body over it, trying to shield it with her own flesh. Another shock came, and another. Each one made her muscles seize and her vision blur, but she did not let go. Through the pain and the tears, Katie looked up at the viewing platform where Zarn stood. She could see his rage, his confusion. The translator collar around her neck was still active. She knew everyone in the arena could hear her. "This cub has been hurt," she said, her voice shaking but clear. "It's been starved and beaten and scared. I don't know what kind of monster hurts a child, but I won't let you hurt this one anymore." The arena exploded with noise. Some aliens in the crowd were screaming in rage at her defiance. Others were making sounds that might have been approval or surprise. Katie could not tell. She could only hold the trembling cub and wait to see what would happen next. The shock stopped. Katie's muscles twitched with aftershocks and her skin felt like it was on fire, but she kept her arms wrapped around the shadow maw cub, feeling its rapid breathing start to slow down. The creature's body was still pressed tight against hers, and its glowing marks had settled into a steady, slow pulse that reminded Katie of a heartbeat. The arena was in chaos. The crowd was shouting in dozens of different languages. Some were standing, gesturing wildly. Others were leaving their seats, pushing toward the exits. Katie could see Zarn on his platform, surrounded by his guards. Even from this distance, she could see the rage in his body language. But she also saw something else. Movement in other parts of the crowd. Aliens who were not shouting or leaving, but watching intently. A tall being covered in gray fur stood with its arms crossed, its head tilted in thought. A group of small flying creatures hovered near the ceiling, their wings creating a soft humming sound. And there, in a section near the front, a mothfolk stood and spread its beautiful wings wide. A gesture Katie had learned meant respect or agreement. The cub shifted in her arms, and Katie looked down at it. Up close, she could see even more signs of mistreatment. One of the creature's claws was cracked and had not healed properly. There were patches where scales were missing, leaving the skin underneath exposed and vulnerable. The glowing marks along its spine, which should have been bright and even, flickered in places like dying lights. Katie began to check the cub over more carefully, using skills she had learned from years of field work. She ran her hands gently along its sides, feeling for broken bones or internal damage. The cub let her, remaining still and quiet. When her fingers found a particularly tender spot near its ribs, the creature flinched but did not pull away. It simply looked at her with those 4 eyes, and Katie saw intelligence there. Not human intelligence, but something real and aware. "I'm sorry," Katie whispered to the cub. "I'm so sorry they hurt you." The cub made a sound, something between a chirp and a rumble. Its tongue flicked out and touched Katie's hand, tasting her skin. Then it did something that made Katie's heart break. It rubbed its head against her palm the same way a cat from Earth might, seeking comfort and affection. Heavy footsteps approached. Katie looked up and saw 4 Vexhari guards entering the arena through one of the gates. They carried weapons this time, not just energy prods, long metal staffs with sharp points at the ends. They moved cautiously, spreading out as they approached. The cub felt Katie's body tense and looked toward the approaching guards. Its own body went rigid, and the glowing marks flared bright again. A low growl rumbled in its throat, but it did not leave Katie's side. Instead, it positioned itself partially in front of her, its small body trying to protect her. Katie felt something twist in her chest. This creature, which had been abused and forced to fight, was trying to protect her. A human. A member of a species it had never met before today. She placed her hand on the cub's head, stroking gently. "It's okay," she said softly. "Stay calm. Stay with me." The guard stopped about 10 feet away. They looked uncertain, which was not something Katie expected to see from Vexhari. One of them spoke into a communication device on his wrist, probably reporting to Zarn. Katie used the moment to study the guards more carefully. She noticed that not all of them were holding their weapons the same way. 2 gripped their staffs tightly, ready to use them, but the other 2 held them loosely, almost reluctantly, and one of those 2 kept glancing toward the crowd, toward the section where the mothfolk had spread its wings. A voice boomed through the speakers, Zarn's voice, but angrier than before. "Separate them. Now. Kill the creature if necessary." The 2 guards with tight grips started forward. But before they could take more than a step, something happened that no one expected. The Shadowmaw cub threw its head back and released a sound that made every being in the arena freeze. It was a cry, high-pitched and piercing. It carried across the arena and beyond, echoing off the metal walls. It was a distress call, the kind that juvenile predators use to summon their family when they are in danger. For a moment, nothing happened. Then from deep below the arena, other voices answered. The roars of adult Shadowmaws, huge and terrible, shook the entire station. Katie felt the vibrations through the floor. The guards stumbled backward. The crowd erupted in panic. The whole station seemed to shake as the adult Shadowmaws threw themselves against whatever barriers held them. Katie heard metal groaning, heard the sound of something massive hitting walls again and again. The cub's distress call had awakened something primal in the adults, something that no cage or chain could fully contain. Zarn's voice came through the speakers again, but this time it was not aimed at the guards. "Shut down the predator pens. Increase sedation, now." But the damage was done. Every being in the arena now knew that there were adult Shadowmaws somewhere below them, and those adults had heard their young cry out in fear. The crowd's panic intensified. Aliens pushed and shoved, trying to reach the exits. In the middle of this chaos, a new voice cut through the noise. It was amplified, coming from somewhere in the crowd. "Stop this. I invoke the Galactic Convention on Sentient Treatment, Article 7. This is illegal." Katie saw who was speaking. It was the mothfolk, the same one who had spread its wings earlier. Guards moved toward it, but other beings in the crowd blocked their path. Article 7 clearly states, the mothfolk continued, its voice steady and clear, that forcing juvenile, non-sentient creatures to engage in combat violates multiple statutes of accepted behavior. This display violates at least 3 separate conventions. Zarn appeared at the edge of his platform. "This is my station. Your Earth laws do not apply here." "They are not Earth laws," another voice called out. This one belonged to a Thornback, a large alien whose species was known for valuing honor and ancient traditions. "They are laws agreed upon by 47 species, including my own. And there is more here than law. There is honor. Or the lack of it." The Thornback pointed at Katie and the cub. "That human showed more courage and compassion in these few minutes than you have shown in your entire career, Zarn." The cub chose her. "Such bonds were sacred to our ancestors before we forgot our own traditions." More voices joined in. Not all of them, and not even most of them, but enough. Enough to make Zarn hesitate. Enough to make the guards stop their advance. Katie held the cub close and watched as the crowd split into factions. Some still shouted for her death, for the entertainment to continue. But others were arguing back, pointing at her, gesturing at the cub. She could not understand all the languages being spoken, but she understood the tone. Something had changed. Something fundamental had shifted in how these beings saw her and the creature in her arms. Movement at the edge of the arena caught Katie's attention. The cages where Ryan, Lisa, and Ben were being held rattled and shook. Lisa was doing something to the lock mechanism. Ryan and Ben were helping, using pieces of metal they must have hidden from the guards. Katie wanted to call out to them, to tell them to be careful, but she did not dare draw attention to what they were doing. Instead, she focused on the cub, stroking its scales, humming her soft song. The creature had stopped its distress call, but it remained tense and alert. The cage door swung open. Lisa stumbled out first, followed by Ryan and Ben. The guards near Katie saw them and started to turn, but they were too far away. The 3 humans ran across the arena sand toward Katie. Ben reached her first. The security officer positioned himself between Katie and the nearest guards. "I don't know what's happening," he said, breathing hard, "but we're not letting them take you alone." Ryan knelt beside Katie, his medical training making him immediately check her for injuries. "Are you hurt?" Did they shock you? I'm okay, Katie said, but the cub needs help. Ryan, look at it. Look at what they've done to it. Ryan turned his attention to the shadow maw. The cub growled when he reached toward it, but Katie placed her hand on its head and it settled down. Ryan's face grew dark as he examined the creature. This is abuse, he said quietly. Systematic abuse. This animal has been beaten, starved, and tortured. Lisa stood with Ben, both of them watching the guards and the crowd. Katie, we need to figure out how to get out of here. Whatever you did, it's bought us time, but it won't last forever. Katie looked at the three people who had come to stand with her. Her friends, her crew. Then she looked at the cub in her arms, still trembling, still seeking comfort from her touch. She thought about the adult shadow maws below, driven to fury by the sound of their young in distress. She thought about the divided crowd, about the mothfolk and the thornback who had spoken up. We're not leaving without the cub, Katie said firmly. They took it from its home, hurt it, tried to make it into a weapon. I'm not leaving it here to suffer more. Ben opened his mouth to argue, then closed it again. He looked at the small creature pressed against Katie, at the way it trusted her completely. Okay, he said finally. Then we figure out a way to save all of us. The station shook again as the shadow maws below continued their assault on the barriers. Alarms began to blare, emergency lights flashed, and in the middle of the chaos, 4 humans and 1 small predator held their ground, refusing to be separated. The arena had become a battlefield, but not the kind Zarn had intended. Instead of watching a human die, the crowd was fighting with itself. Arguments broke out in multiple sections. Some aliens were pushing toward the exits, desperate to leave before the adult shadow maws broke free. Others were pushing forward, trying to get closer to the arena floor to see what would happen next. Zarn's guards formed a line between Katie's group and the main gates. There were 8 of them now, all armed, all looking uncertain. They knew their orders, but they also heard the adult shadow maws below, felt the station shake with each impact. If those barriers failed, everyone in this arena would be in danger. The shadow maw cub remained pressed against Katie, its body tense. Every time the station shook, the glowing marks along its spine flared brighter. It made soft sounds, almost like whimpers, and Katie realized it was calling to the adults below, telling them it was here, it was alive, but it was trapped. Ryan finished his examination of the cub and looked at Katie with serious eyes. This creature needs medical attention soon. Some of these injuries are infected. If it doesn't get treatment, it could die. Katie felt cold fear grip her heart. She had known the cub was hurt, but she had not realized how bad it was. Can you help it? Maybe. If I had my medical supplies, if I had time. Ryan glanced at the guards, at the chaos around them. But we don't have either of those things right now. Lisa was studying the arena walls, looking for any possible escape route. There has to be a way out. These arenas always have emergency exits in case something goes wrong. Something is going wrong, Ben said, his eyes never leaving the guards. The question is whether we can use that to our advantage. Before anyone could respond, a new sound cut through the chaos. It was not the roar of shadow maws or the shouts of the crowd. It was a sharp, piercing alarm that made every being in the arena stop and look up. Words appeared on screens around the arena, in multiple languages. Katie could read the human translation. Unidentified vessel detected. Station security level raised to maximum. Zarn appeared at the edge of his platform again. His scales had darkened with rage or fear, Katie could not tell which. Someone is hacking our sensors. Find them and stop them. But more text appeared on the screens. This is the UES Phoenix to Crack station. You are holding 4 human citizens against their will. Release them immediately or face military intervention. Katie's heart leaped. The Phoenix. Someone had found them. Someone had come looking. She wanted to cry with relief, but she forced herself to stay focused. They were not safe yet. The crowd's reaction was immediate and intense. Some species began demanding that Zarn release the humans to avoid conflict. Others argued that showing weakness to humans would damage the station's reputation. The arguments grew louder, more heated. Zarn's voice boomed through the speakers. This is an empty threat. 1 human ship against a fully armed station? They would not dare attack. But the screens showed something different. Long-range sensors detected 3 more ships entering the system. Not human ships this time. A Mothfolk diplomatic vessel, a Thornback patrol ship, a Galactic Peacekeeping Force scout. The word had spread fast. What was happening in this arena was being broadcast somehow, and other species were responding. Katie looked toward the section where the mothfolk had spoken earlier. The being was holding up a small device, pointing it at the arena floor. Recording. It had been recording everything and sending it out across communication networks. The secret arena was secret no longer. Zarn realized what was happening at the same moment. Shut down all communication arrays. Now, but it was too late. The damage was done. Images of Katie protecting the Shadow Maw cub, of the humans standing together against armed guards, of the juvenile creature choosing compassion over violence, had already spread across multiple networks. Beings on hundreds of worlds were watching. The guards looked at each other, then at their weapons, then at the small group in the center of the arena. One of them lowered his staff slightly. "Station Master," he called up to Zarn. "Perhaps we should consider their offer. The humans appear to have allies. No." Zarn's voice was sharp with fury. "I do not negotiate with prey. Kill them all. The creature too." But the guards did not move forward. They could see what Zarn could not. The tide had turned. If they killed humans now, with witnesses recording and ships arriving, they would face consequences. Real consequences, not the empty threats of frontier law. The Thornback from earlier pushed through the crowd to the arena's edge. His species was large and powerful, covered in thick armor like hide. "Zarn," he called out, "you have lost. Accept it with what honor you have left." "Honor?" Zarn's laugh was bitter. "I am a businessman. I deal in profit, not honor." "Then deal in survival," the Thornback said, "because if you harm those humans now, you will have war, not just with Earth, but with every species that values the bond between protector and protected. You have shown us something today that we had forgotten, and we will not let you destroy it." The station shook again, harder this time. The sound of metal tearing came from below. The adult Shadow Maws were getting closer to breaking free. If they escaped into the station, hundreds would die. Katie made a decision. She stood up, carefully keeping one hand on the cub. The creature stood with her, pressing against her leg. "Zarn!" she called out, her voice carrying through the translator. "The adult Shadow Maws are going to break free. When they do, they'll be looking for this cub. If I'm here, I can calm them. If I'm dead, nothing will stop them from tearing this station apart." It was a gamble. She had no idea if she could actually calm adult Shadow Maws, but she knew predator behavior, knew that many species would respond to their young. If the cub was calm and safe, the adults might also calm down. Zarn stared at her for a long moment. Katie could see the calculation in his eyes, weighing profit against loss, pride against survival. Before he could answer, another voice came through the communication system. "Crack Station, this is Captain Alex Monroe of the UES Phoenix. We are prepared to disable your weapon systems if necessary, but we would prefer a peaceful resolution. Send the humans to Docking Bay 3, along with any creatures that have bonded with them. You have 1 hour." The captain's voice was calm but firm. Katie felt a surge of hope. They had not been abandoned. Earth remembered its people, even this far from home. Zarn's scales shifted through several colors, a sign of emotional turmoil in Vexhari. Finally he spoke. "Fine, take your humans. Take the broken creature. But this is not over." "Yes," the Thornback said quietly. "It is." The guard stepped aside, creating a path to one of the gates. But as Katie and her group started to move, the cub suddenly pulled away from her. It ran a few steps toward the center of the arena, then looked back at her and made a sound. Not a distress call this time. A summoning call. Katie understood. The other cubs. "There are more down there, aren't there?" One of the guards who had lowered his weapon nodded slowly. 7 total. All taken from protected worlds. All used in the arena or sold. "We're not leaving without them," Katie said firmly. She looked up at Zarn. "All of them. Or I stay here and let the adults break free." "You are in no position to make demands," Zarn hissed. "Actually," Captain Monroe's voice came through again, "she is. The Galactic Peacekeeping Force has just informed us that Shadow Maws are listed under the Protected Species Act. Possessing them, especially juveniles, carries severe penalties. You can let them go with the humans or you can face trial. Your choice." The station shook again. More alarms blared. Structural warnings appeared on the screens. The barriers holding the adult Shadow Maws were failing. Zarn's voice, when it came, was full of defeat. "Release all the Shadow Maw cubs. Give them to the humans. Get them off my station. Guards hurried away to carry out the order. Katie knelt and pulled her cub close again. It was shaking, but not with fear this time. With anticipation. It knew its siblings were coming. Ryan put his hand on Katie's shoulder. You realize we're about to try to transport 7 traumatized predator cubs through a hostile station to a docking bay. Katie smiled despite everything. Yes, we are, Lisa laughed, a sound edged with hysteria. Just another day as human explorers, right? Ben checked the corridor beyond the gate. Let's move fast. I don't trust Zarn to keep his word for long. The gates opened and 6 more Shadowmaw cubs were brought into the arena. They were all in similar condition to the first, hurt and scared and too thin. When they saw their sibling with Katie, they rushed forward. The first cub called to them, and they gathered around Katie and the other humans, seeking the same comfort and protection they had seen their sibling receive. Katie looked at her crew, at the 7 cubs surrounding them, at the impossible situation they were in. Then she looked up at the watching crowd, at the beings recording everything, at the ships arriving to help. Let's go home, she said. The journey through Crack Station was tense. Katie and her crew moved through corridors filled with watching aliens, 7 Shadowmaw cubs following close behind them. The cubs stayed near the humans, their glowing marks pulsing in sync, creating a strange and beautiful light show in the dim hallways. Some beings they passed backed away, frightened of the predators. Others watched with something that looked like respect or curiosity. A few even bowed their heads as the group passed, a gesture Katie did not fully understand but appreciated anyway. When they reached Docking Bay 3, Captain Alex Monroe was waiting. She was a tall woman with gray hair pulled back in a tight bun, her uniform crisp despite having just traveled through hostile space. Her eyes widened when she saw the 7 cubs surrounding Katie. Dr. Miller, the captain said. Your report mentioned 1 cub. Not 7. Plans changed, Katie replied. She was exhausted, running on nothing but willpower and the determination to get these creatures to safety. The captain looked at the cubs, at the way they stayed close to the humans, at the obvious signs of abuse on their bodies. Her jaw tightened. Get them on board. Medical bay is ready. We've also got a mothfolk xenobiologist named Tresh joining us. Apparently, your situation caught some attention. The Phoenix was not a large ship, but it was well equipped for search and rescue operations. The medical bay had been expanded to accommodate the cubs, with special containment areas set up in case the creatures became aggressive. They did not. The cubs followed Katie onto the ship and settled in the medical bay without any force or coercion. They seemed to understand in whatever way their minds worked, that these humans were trying to help them. Ryan and Tresh worked together to treat the cubs' injuries. The mothfolk xenobiologist was gentle and skilled, his many limbs able to hold instruments and comfort frightened cubs at the same time. Katie watched as they cleaned wounds, set broken bones, and administered medicine for infections. The cub that had first approached Katie in the arena stayed by her side throughout everything. Even when Ryan needed to perform a painful procedure to remove infected tissue, the cub remained calm as long as Katie held its head and hummed her wordless song. Remarkable, Tresh said, his translator rendering his clicking speech into human words. This level of cross-species bonding normally takes weeks or months to develop. Yet this cub trusts you completely after only hours. Trauma can accelerate bonding, Katie said quietly. In moments of extreme stress, any source of comfort becomes precious. Captain Monroe entered the medical bay and gestured for Katie to join her in the hallway. Katie reluctantly left the cub with Ryan and Tresh, though it watched her go with all 4 eyes tracking her movement. We need to talk about what happens next, the captain said once they were alone. The Galactic Peacekeeping Force has seized control of Crack's station. They're arresting Zarn and his people, documenting everything they find, but there's a complication with the cubs. Katie felt her stomach tighten. What kind of complication? They're from Krell 9, a protected world in the Outer Rim. The Peacekeeping Force wants to return them immediately, but Tresh is arguing that moving them right now could kill them. They're too weak, too traumatized. They need time to heal first. He's right, Katie said. Moving them in this condition would be cruel. I agree. But there's another issue. Captain Monroe looked uncomfortable. The cubs have imprinted on your group, especially on you. Separating you from them before they're ready could cause severe psychological damage. Tresh is recommending that you be designated as their temporary guardian during the rehabilitation period. Katie's mind raced. How long would that take? Months, maybe longer. You'd need to stay with them, help them heal, slowly reintroduce them to their natural behaviors. Eventually, you'd need to take them back to Krell 9 and help them rejoin their species. I'll do it, Katie said without hesitation. You don't want to think about it? This would change your career, your life. You'd be dedicating months or years to these creatures. Katie thought about the cub in the arena, about how it had chosen her when it could have chosen violence, about how it had tried to protect her despite being small and hurt, about the trust in its eyes when she held it through painful treatments. I'm sure, she said, someone took these cubs from their families and hurt them. The least I can do is help them heal and go home. Captain Monroe studied her for a moment, then nodded. Then it settled. We'll set up a temporary facility on Research Station Delta 7. It's near Krell 9, has the right environment, and is staffed with people who can help. Tresh has agreed to stay on as your assistant. Your crew has volunteered to help as well. Over the following weeks, Katie and her team worked with the 7 cubs. They learned each cub's personality, their likes and dislikes, their fears and comforts. The first cub, which Lisa had started calling Shadow because of its dark scales, remained closest to Katie. But all the cubs gradually learned to trust the humans. Ryan monitored their health, celebrating each small improvement. Lisa built enrichment devices that helped the cubs practice hunting and playing. Ben worked with them on physical therapy, helping their injured bodies grow strong again. And Katie taught them that not all beings would hurt them, that the universe held kindness as well as cruelty. News of what had happened spread across the galaxy. The images recorded in the arena were broadcast on hundreds of worlds. Katie received messages from beings she had never met, thanking her for showing compassion, for standing up to cruelty, for protecting the young. Earth's diplomatic corps was both horrified and pleased. Horrified at what Katie and her crew had endured, but pleased at how it reflected on humanity. Other species that had viewed humans as weak or insignificant began to see them differently. Compassion, it turned out, was a kind of strength that many species valued. 3 months later, Katie stood on Krell 9. The planet was beautiful, with purple vegetation and 3 moons hanging in a turquoise sky. Shadow, now much larger and healthier, stood beside her. The cub's scales gleamed with proper health, and its glowing marks pulsed with confidence rather than fear. In the distance, Katie could see a pack of wild shadow moths. Tresh had spent weeks locating Shadow's birth pack, using genetic markers and territorial patterns. They were there now, watching from the tree line. Katie knelt and put her arms around Shadow one last time. The cub pressed against her, purring that deep rumble she had come to love. It's time, Katie whispered. Time to go home. Shadow pulled back and looked at her with all 4 eyes. Katie saw intelligence there and understanding. The cub knew what was happening. It knew this was goodbye. Slowly, reluctantly, Shadow turned toward the distant pack. The matriarch emerged from the trees, a massive shadow maw with silver-streaked scales. She approached cautiously, assessing the situation. Shadow took a step toward the matriarch, then stopped and looked back at Katie. The cub's bioluminescence flared in a pattern Katie had learned meant affection and gratitude. Then Shadow ran to the matriarch. The adult shadow maw sniffed Shadow carefully, her tongue flicking out to taste the cub's scent. Then she did something that made Katie's breath catch. The matriarch looked directly at Katie and lowered her massive head in what could only be a bow. A gesture of respect. Of thanks. The pack emerged from the trees surrounding Shadow with welcome. The other 6 cubs, released in different territories over the past weeks, would find their own families. But Shadow was home now, truly home. Katie watched until the pack disappeared into the purple forest. Tears ran down her face, but she was smiling. This was how it should be. Shadow belonged with its own kind in its own world. Ryan, Lisa, and Ben joined her. They stood together in silence for a while, watching the empty forest. Think we'll see Shadow again? Lisa asked. Maybe, Katie said. Shadow maws have long memories, and Earth is funding a permanent research station here. I've been offered the position of lead xenobiologist. And you accepted, didn't you? Ben said, though it was not really a question. Katie nodded. This place, these creatures, they need protection. They need people who understand them, who will fight for them. After everything we've been through, I can't just walk away. They returned to the landing site where their shuttle waited. As they prepared to leave, Katie looked back one more time. In the distance, barely visible through the trees, she saw a flash of bioluminescent blue. Shadow watching them go. Katie raised her hand in farewell. The blue light flashed twice in response. Then it was gone. On the shuttle back to the research station, Katie reviewed messages that had come through. There were offers from universities wanting her to speak about her experience. Requests from other xenobiologists asking for advice on cross-species bonding. Even an invitation from the Galactic Council to testify about conditions in illegal arenas. But one message stood out. It was from a small colony world called Haven 3. They had a problem with a group of rescued predators that no one could handle. The creatures were traumatized and aggressive, and the colony was considering euthanasia as the only option. The message ended with a simple plea. "We heard what you did on Crack Station. Please help us. These creatures deserve a chance, but we don't know how to give it to them." Katie looked at Ryan, Lisa, and Ben. They had all read the message, too. "Well," Ryan said, "I guess we have our next assignment." Lisa laughed. "Saving traumatized predators across the galaxy.
That's what we do now?
Someone has to," Katie said. She began composing a response to Haven 3, letting them know that help was on the way. As the shuttle flew through Krell 9's atmosphere, Katie thought about everything that had changed. Weeks ago, she had been a simple researcher, collecting plant samples and writing papers. Now she was something different. An advocate, a guardian, a bridge between species that had never understood each other before. She thought about Shadow, running with its pack through purple forests. She thought about the arena, about the moment when a frightened cub had chosen trust over violence. She thought about how one choice, one moment of compassion, had rippled outward to touch hundreds of lives across dozens of worlds. Humans had proven themselves to the galaxy that day, not through strength or technology or conquest, but through the simple act of protecting a child that was not even their own species, and Katie knew that was something worth dedicating her life to. Not just for the creatures she would help, but for what it said about humanity itself, that they were a species that could look at suffering anywhere in the universe and say, "No more, not while we can stop it." The shuttle broke atmosphere and headed for the research station. Behind them, Krell 9 spun in space, beautiful and wild, and now a little bit safer because 4 humans had refused to let cruelty win. Katie smiled and began planning for Haven 3. There were more creatures that needed help, more lives to save, more bonds to build between humans and the vast, diverse galaxy they were still learning to understand. The work was just beginning.